of sorts. I'd lost my wife and mother within a 4-year span. And so it was said I'd written an important social history from the crucible of my own grief. Just before I flew to Rome, the Dean of Liberal Arts, a Beowulf specialist who spoke some Italian, hosted a small going-away party for me and gave a toast that ended with, "In bocca al lupo," into the mouth of the wolf. Technically this means good luck in Italian, but leaving his mouth it took on an Anglo-Saxon menace, violent and foreboding, as if he were rallying me into the carnivorous maw of the future, as if he knew that something was waiting to swallow me whole. That swallowing began with an email from my Aunt Iris the night before my flight. My mother had died a year earlier, and left me the stone cottage behind her family's medieval villa in Umbria. For 6 months, Valetto and the cottage would be my home, just as it had been during my childhood summers. Iris lived in the villa with her sisters, Violet and Rose, all of them elderly and widowed, and my 99-year-old grandmother. The email's subject line read, "Una occupante abusiva," and it took me a moment to port the phrase into English and realize it meant a squatter. A female squatter, to be precise. In her winding academic Italian, Iris was a retired sociology professor. She explained that a middle-aged woman, a northerner, had recently shown up at the villa with some correspondence from Aldo Serafino, my maternal grandfather, and taken up residence in my mother's cottage. During World War II, Aldo had sympathized with the Partisans, an umbrella group of Italians resisting the fascists and occupying Germans, but he went into hiding in the spring of 1944 and was never heard from again. My grandmother had attempted to find him during and after the war, but eventually she gave up. The woman from the north asserted that her family had been promised the stone cottage at the back of the villa in exchange for the assistance they'd afforded Aldo, who joined the resistance movement in Piedmont. She intended, nearly 3/4 of a century later, to take up her family's rightful claim. After spending a weekend in Rome with my daughter, Susan, I took the train to Orvieto, where Milo Scorza, the villa's handyman, was scheduled to pick me up. Susan was completing a PhD in England and had to get back for a conference, but she would return later in the month for my grandmother's 100th birthday. And so I found myself alone in my second-class car, looking out the window and occasionally paging through Luigi Barzini's The Italians, a neglected classic that chronicled the nation's quirks and obsessions. It was a book I hadn't read since I was a teenager, when I was first trying to demystify my mother and her Umbrian family. Normally on Italian trains I'm invisible, because I resemble a vacationing Anglo-Italian librarian in a pair of scuffed Swiss alpine boots, or a semi-retired bureaucrat who makes bird feeders on the weekends. Kindly, bookish, a vaguely Roman nose. But this was November 2nd, Il Giorno dei Morti, when Italians head out to ancestral villages and grave sites to pay their respects to the dead. And so my lack of flowers drew accusatory stares from passengers cradling white and gold chrysanthemums. I pretended not to notice, glancing between my book and the landscape out the window. The woman sitting across from me, 70s, wool skirt, silk headscarf, kept looking up from her knitting at the Polaroid I was using as a bookmark. Taken the day before, the photo showed an Italian man dressed as a gladiator standing between Susan and me in front of the Colosseum. He was holding a plastic sword to my throat, grinning into the camera, while Susan's head was thrown back in laughter. I had the glassy hangdog expression of a fish that has just been plucked from a lake. I could see that the woman was assembling a breadcrumb trail of clues. The unmarried left hand, the photograph with the blonde in her 20s, the scuffed boots, and my lack of flowers. I knew from my grandmother and my aunts that older Italian women were capable of deductions that bordered on the omniscient, that in a few lacerating eye strikes they could infer your marital status, your religion, and intestinal health, whether you slept through the night. And I felt sure that I was being regarded by this woman as a shambling drifter without morals or respect for the dead. To set her mind at ease, I looked up from my book and into her Old Testament face. "Mia figlia," I said. "My daughter." For good measure, I told her in Italian that I was a widower, that it had taken me the better part of 5 years to remove my wedding band, that Susan was getting her PhD in economics at Oxford, and that I was very proud of her. This information passed through her like a muscle relaxant as she returned to knitting a tiny mauve sock. Out the window, Orvieto came into view like some floating colossus from an ocean liner, rising 1,000 feet above the plains of Umbria, its stone walls and rooftops